So, Chris, one of the things I really love about doing this show is when we catch up with the artists that we've had in the past to see what's new and exciting as far as songs, tours, and projects they're working on. And this guest was on our show in January of 2021. And his show really stood out because of the instrumentation and recording magic in his songs. This will be another great show with the artist known as User, and that's spelled US3R. Welcome back to Next to You.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Real good, real good. How are things out there? Seattle.
Well, Seattle's doing well. Since the
Yeah.
last time we spoke, it's become a lot more peaceful around Seattle. It's pretty
Oh.
cold out right now, though. It's about 15 degrees outside.
Oh, we're
wow,
warmer than you right now.
Yeah, we're warmer than you are. That's something.
It happens once a year, but
Yeah.
right now it's that time of the year.
Yeah, that's actually headed our way. That we're going to have that next week. It's supposed to go high. It's supposed to be 7.
Yeah.
But,
So
I haven't even shoveled yet this year.
Yeah.
It's really unusual. It's nice, but it's not quite right. So
yeah, just to let the audience know, we're airing this show in January, but we might replay it, and they're going to say, if we replay it in the summer, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the date is January 13th, 2024.
that's
There you go.
So you have an album release, and it happened in August of 2023. And
Yeah, it's my
album
4th
is-
record.
Yes,
saw
that's what I was
that.
going to say. We have 4 albums here, but this one's called "Rise of the Midnight Sun."
Yeah.
And it says on we do Apple iTunes, and so it says that they've labeled the genre as pop rock, art rock. And when we were talking earlier, you called it electronic classic rock. So
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting how you label music.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, like my kind of take on the genre may be different than what the algorithms assign to
Assign
it,
to it.
right? Because
Yes.
the algorithms are looking at it from a sort of bits and bytes perspective. They're looking at it from sonic qualities, song lengths, tempos, energy levels, and then all of a sudden they're doing classification with machine learning to compare it to other things, and they go, "Oh, that's an R&B record or whatever," right? It's often 70% correct. It's not super.
Yeah.
obvious,
Well,
right? So the classic rock thing, let me explain. So like basically I grew up in Palm Springs, California. And if you've ever been to Palm Springs, you'll know that it's hot. There's a lot of artsy folks out there, a lot of people wearing like leather wristbands and their topaz and all the things, and classic rock is playing nonstop on the radio all the time. So even though I grew up, listening to like Metallica and hip hop and all the different things, I was constantly sort of in the sort of the waters of classic rock around me, that which is to say very guitar centric, very dry in its recording, very open chordy, right? All these things that are very sort of like the staples of like 60s and 70s guitar music, right?
Sure.
And if you go in towards the 80s, it becomes a little bit more digital, right? Digital reverbs, more drum machines, things like that. You get into the 90s, you're talking grunge, all of that stuff. And then you get into like the really kind of squeaky clean, like produced stuff of the 2000s and up to today, right? So the first 3 records of mine were like heavily electronic. They're very much of the 2000s and had a lot of those hallmarks with hints of like 90s R&B and heavy synth music and all of that. And then, I've been playing a lot of shows over the years where I was doing a lot of knob turning and keyboard pressing. And I grew up playing guitar and drums, like in bands. And I felt like looking into the crowd, I felt like, I feel like I could be more entertaining. I feel like they could be having a better time. And so I started bringing guitar into my live shows and playing guitar accompaniment on all of those things that didn't have guitar parts in them originally. And then I was like, okay, well, now I've got an entire repertoire of rewrites of songs. And I was like, why don't I just write an album that is
yeah.
this?
Oh,
And
definitely.
so I was like, okay, so one thing led to another, and then I put 13 or 10 track. I don't remember how much is on that record, actually. Let me take a look real quick.
There's 13.
13
13
tracks. I put
tracks.
13 tracks, and I want to say 8 of them are like super guitar forward, and they're meant to be played live. Like they're meant to be like a,
Cool.
really.
Right. You can feel that. I mean, seriously, when you're listening to it. So when you did you have a release party?
Or did you have a performance
Or-
where you released it?
Well, so I've done that over the years. I think I'm pretty sure that my wife had organized like a getaway to like a Bavarian mountain town for a
Okay.
birthday, and we like rented a beautiful cabin next to a river, and we had
Okay.
all of my friends there, and we did that for my birthday. So I don't think we did an album celebration because we were busy doing that, but I've done that in the past. Last time last birthday or a couple birthdays ago, I had a show on my birthday, and I brought all my friends there, and my wife made user cookies and gave them out to everybody, which is actually really funny. She had them
Yeah.
like professionally made with like printed logos on them and stuff. But yeah, no, this one was kind of low key.
Uh-huh. And then released to what? Just people can download it, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, so I mean the kind of the way of the land these days is to use like distributors, and that puts it on every single streaming platform, which means that some platforms are like purchase centric and some platforms are free streaming centric, and then you've got Bandcamp in the middle of that spectrum and all of that. So I'm like pretty okay with embracing the sort of modern consumption model. Like I would rather people just go listen to my music on Spotify for free than like buy it if they can. Like I don't really care. That's not how I earn my living. So I want them to listen to the music and enjoy it first. That's not really a money thing for me so much.
That's nice. Yeah. I mean, in a way, I mean, we've talked to other artists and they'll have a new, album coming out. And I go, are you making CDs? I go, "Oh, and if you are, why?" Because in the, now it's like, oh, I'd like to buy your CD, but I have nothing to play it on.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's funny you mention that because up there you can't really see it, but there's a cassette tape.
Oh
And the
yeah.
cassette tape was something I did a collaboration. I did a lot of collabs with different artists last year, like 5 or 6. And one of them was with a electronic DJ artist called Starfarer. He's kind of more like Daft Punky, like space EDM kind of stuff. And we did this really Jacob Collier-esque sort of disco track called Perfect Girl. And he put out the whole album of those songs on a cassette tape. And I was like, oh, that's really cool, like for my
Yeah.
shelf, but I've not owned a cassette player for 20 years. So I feel the same way about CD players. It's like, I don't own a CD player, so I might as well just not invest in that.
Yeah. We'll have again different artists come into our studio and they'll see that I have a dual cassette still in the rack. And I go, oh man, I have the stuff on cassette that we can transfer it over. I go, yeah, just bring it sometime.
I'm sure there's
Yeah.
internet businesses out there where you can just send a box of tapes and have them convert them to digital at this point.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
But
Kristen, are you getting any airplay on the album or any of your songs?
Oh, so the notion of airplay nowadays is like either you're Beyonce and you're like, doing the pay to play thing for like major radio networks, or you're doing the NACC thing, like the college radio and like the local radio. I did that for my first album like super heavily. It didn't really move the needle a whole lot in terms of the way that like people interact on streaming. So like I kind of focused a lot of my energy on the streaming side. So I actually did about 100,000 streams last year of all of the new stuff I had put out. So went pretty well. I mean, for a small artist like me, I'm not,
yeah.
I have friends who do millions a year, so it's
Yeah, and then when you tour, that's another thing we were going to ask you, how's the touring, because obviously in 2021 you said you had 2020.
Yeah.
I know in
yeah,
COVID, but you
February and
had
March of 2020.
you
Yeah.
had you said you had a whole touring schedule and it all got canceled, which is really disappointing. But what's going on right now for you in touring?
So I'm actually working right now with a couple of my booker friends to put together a tour. So we're trying to aim for
Oh,
something in July or August, and we're going to do a little West Coast tour. So that, may or may not include Canada up on the West Coast and going all the way down to like, Los Angeles, and then yeah, maybe inland a bit to like Arizona and those places. But I'd probably do about 10 dates up and down the West Coast in the summertime at some point.
Mhm.
well, that we should be traveling out there to
Yeah.
see 'em. Yeah.
Well, we did have a show for a touring European act called Empathy Test a couple months ago, or actually it was on Halloween night, as it so happens, um, in Seattle, in a place called the Central Saloon, which is like a historic grunge bar in Pioneer Square. It's like an old brick building. It's really old,
Mhm.
and they toured all over the United States, and they were very exhausted by the time they got to us. And so we had a really good show there, sold out crowd. It was really good. We were really happy with that. And yeah, at the end of the day, like, I'm a working professional also, so I have a 9 to 5, and so my touring schedule is really kind of at the mercy of my PTO.
Yeah, exactly.
I have friends who are like full-time bands, like that
Mhm.
they only do that and they tour all the time. That Empathy Test band is kind of in that category. And like, it's a choice. Like, it's a different path one goes down, and I definitely I enjoy the dichotomy of having a professional life and a music life.
You still have the same day job as before?
Yeah, last time I was talking to you, I was over at Amazon. I was doing
Mhm.
like technology stuff, and I'm actually doing a similar job now at Meta. If you ever heard of Facebook, that's us, Meta.
Oh,
Right.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm being facetious. Of course, we've heard of Facebook. 3 billion users a month, right?
I told you when we were writing that when I listened to the new album,
Mhm.
Mhm.
I just love the way that every song starts, because
Mm.
somehow you like captivated me right away. Like it was either like the synth was doing something really cool, or you had like the guitar going, and it just made me lean my ear. So I really want to encourage
Yeah.
I want to encourage our audience to look up your album. It's called Rise of the Midnight Sun. Can you tell us just a little bit about the recording of it? Are you still doing it in your house? And
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, if you can
okay.
see me on camera here, I got my
Yeah.
whole recording
Oh,
studio,
Oh, there it
so I've
is.
got
Mhm.
I'm 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 submerged. I'm in a fishbowl down here,
You
and
got the
I've got
key. Mhm.
I've got the ability to do all different sorts of things around here. So whatever vibe I'm looking for, I'm
even
just doing it.
change
And
you even change the lighting.
Yeah,
oh yeah.
he's changing the light, the
We
color
are
of the
so
lights.
far behind, Jules.
I
Yeah,
know.
well, these are
Well,
$20 purchases on Amazon.com, so help yourself.
oh,
No, but
okay.
just to talk about the recording process. So
Yeah.
like, the thing is that because I have my day job, I find myself doing music in pieces late at night. So my wife will go to sleep and I'll work from like 10 p.m. till like 1 or 2 in the morning, and I find myself
Mm.
doing that maybe 5 days a week.
Mhm.
So I'm really burning my candle at both ends a lot of the time. And so you can kind of hear this sort of exasperation in some of my lyrics and some of my presentation. I think it more has to do with the lack of sleep, to be honest. But you know, uh, it all starts with the stuff that you see around me. So I've got, synthesizers down here. I've got my
Mhm.
Prophet. I've got my DX7. I've got my Prologue. Um, got my bass, my guitars, my acoustics. Got
Mhm.
mics everywhere. I've got, racks of things. And so like I have a pretty good studio set up at this point. So like I can make pretty professional grade stuff. Um, but from a conceptual standpoint, I have just, at any given time, I have like 50 partially written songs that are just kind of sitting in a folder. So what do I do with those? Right? Not all of the things all happen, at once, right? And so what I'll do is I'll kind of capture moments of ideas, and I'll sit on them for a while, and I'll let life happen. And whatever my theme in life is, I kind of start to put ideas to it. and then I'll stitch those things together. So, case in point, I had been talking about how I wanted to have more guitar forward stuff on my catalog so I could play it live.
Mhm.
So I wrote games, I wrote Nightmare, and I wrote the intro song, which is called Hello World. All of those are guitar forward songs, but those are written at a different time than some of the other stuff, right?
Mm.
Also, that album thematically is about personal growth. It's about sort of like, me sort of watching myself change, like over time, looking in the mirror and seeing a different person.
Mhm.
It's about the passage of time over years and years and years. And so, like, if you kind of think about who you were 20 years ago and what your goals were and what was important to you, and now, as you kind of fast forward, maybe some of those things seem a bit trivial now. Like you've kind of wised up, or you sort of slowed down a bit, and you reflect, right?
Mhm.
That's what this album is actually, Rise of the Midnight Sun. So like the rising sun is kind of like represents change, but the midnight sun is kind of uh it hints at like the sort of the push and pull of the light and the dark that's in you, right? Um, and then, third kind of aspect of that imagery was that I had done a trip in the dead of winter in Iceland last December,
Wow.
and they had about 45 minutes a day of sunlight. And the rest of the day, it seemed like kind of like this dusky sunset, like this blue glow on the horizon, and it's dark and it's 10 degrees outside and it's super cold and jet lag,
Sure.
So there I was, sitting in Iceland, and I had kind of been doing the tourist stuff, and I was learning about the whales and the Vikings and the brutal conditions and the history and all of this stuff. And I started to find that those kind of things were in my head because here I was sitting awake at 3 in the morning in the lobby of this Icelandic hotel on an old leather couch with furry, animal skin blankets everywhere and weird, leather lights hanging from stuff. And I just felt like I was in this other place. And so, Rise of the Midnight Sun. It's like like when like an eclipse happens and you see darkness with a contour of light. It's like that's what it feels like. You're in the glow of the midnight sun when you're there in the middle of winter. And so that visually was kind of symbolic for me, because it kind of started to feel like that was the changing from within, like over time, like
That's
you're
nice.
growing up, you know.
Well, now that hearing you explain the album in that way, uh, I really enjoyed the final cut. It's a beautiful song. But that was Try Again, or
Let's try again.
Let's Try Again. Yeah.
And it said something about Saint Moses. Is that an artist that helped you?
Oh, Saint Moss. Saint
Oh,
Moss.
oh, you said Moses, Chris.
Well,
Oh well.
I can't read.
That's okay. Yeah, yeah,
M-O-S
no.
M-O-S-S?
MOSS. Yeah. So
Okay.
you'll notice that there's a lot of plants around me.
Okay.
So in
Oh.
Seattle, there's everything is mossy. So part of the strategy of me sort of branching out into other styles of music is that I write under different pseudonyms. So I have Wolf Pet. Wolf Pet is like
Mhm.
kind of indie rock, with a bit of acoustic stuff. Saint Moss is like ultra just super acoustic music, like kind of coffee shop stuff. And then User is my like heavy electronic thing. And so like
Ah.
when I write these songs in the mindset of these other pseudonyms, and then I just sit on it for a year, and then all of a sudden I'm like making an electronic version of it for the album. I gotta credit the other artist. That was them
That's
writing that. And
oh,
then it
that's so
became sort of like through
interesting.
the lens of User at the very end of it. So Try
Okay.
Again, when I told you that I left one company and I went to the other, I was experiencing extreme burnout at that point. I had just keep in mind, I had just gone through 5 years there. I lived in downtown during the pandemic in the protests. I was working myself like a dog, and then all of a sudden, um, I felt like I had to go. And that kind of burnout feeling made me feel like, what am I doing? Like, why am I putting so much effort into all these things? Like, when maybe I don't feel so appreciated, those types of things. And there I go into Meta, which happens to be a really peaceful place to work in comparison to Amazon,
Oh,
right? And so like this sort of bookend on the album of personal journey, discovery, self-reflection, all of that stuff was a very real, tangible life experience of mine, which was like I had felt like emotionally I had hit rock bottom, and that was try again, you know? And
mm,
that's like basically don't beat
mm,
yourself up, just do it again,
Mhm.
move on.
Yeah.
So I would say like every song on the record is me sort of talking to myself in the mirror in some way,
mm.
having a conversation, between like hello world, like me sort of acknowledging that I'm not as indestructible as I used to think I was, or nightmare, like, hey, you want to be depressed or you want to like feel like you're a victim, like, hey, like we can create any kind of nightmare you want, buddy.
Mhm.
Or try again, like, hey, you might feel like you've, burnt all the gas in your gas tank, but like really you got to keep going, like all of these things are sort of themes of
Mhm.
this personal journey.
Well, that really tells our audience they need to listen to the lyrics, and not just the amazing musicality of your songs.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the writing process for the lyrics may feel a bit hastily written in my own view, because like I'll sit down and I'll record one line at a time, writing them. I'll write every line as I record it. And by the end, sometimes you'll find that like the lyric might lack a bit of cohesion. But the thing is, though, is that those ideas have been sitting there for a year in my head. I've been living those experiences. And so, like, I'm not John Mayer. I'm not like writing a hit pop song
Mhm.
that is like perfectly Berkeley School of Music, like lyrically perfect. But the idea was there. I've lived it. It's cohesive to my life experience. And so when I kind of do the stream of consciousness writing thing, it's in the ballpark, so it's good enough for me.
Good.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a couple songs that stood out as far as harmonies, and one was
Mm,
track 2, which is Glow, and track 8, Pale Blue Dot. And
yeah.
we really enjoyed those harmonies. And the blue dot, I wrote down, it sounds like you used the sounds from Millennial Blues, which is a big hit from one of your other albums. And it sounded similar to, the instrumentation that you used, the
Yeah.
synth sound. But I really love the contrast when
Yeah.
it drops to a really soft part with those harmonies. Really nice job on that one.
Yeah, Pale Blue Dot. So, I was talking about my experience in Seattle where we were like going through all of those protests and stuff. You know, at the end of the day, like, it can feel like if you ever turn on like the TV and see like people like fighting about politics or whatever, it can feel like this endless cycle, right? Like it never ends. Well, I wrote a song about that on my last album, Dreams and Nightmares. It was called On and On. And the opening lyric of that song was, I don't remember a time when the world wasn't burning down.
Mm.
And this kind of speaks to my experience when I was, I'm 38 now. 10 years ago, I remember people were at war with each other. 10 years before that, people were at war with each other. And it goes on and on and on and on. And why? Why?
Mhm.
Like the conclusion I came to is that these people sort of like make a sport out of this. And it's really a stupid way to live, really. Like, because like we have precious time on earth and it's running out constantly. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like my time is running out always. So that's why I work late into the night every single day, is because like my time is running out. I don't want to waste it. And when you think about war, right? You think about Ukraine, you think about Seattle, you think about what's happening in the Middle East right now. Like,
Mhm.
why is it that we've been doing this for 100 years or a
Exactly.
thousand years? Like,
Mm.
what have we learned? And so Pale Blue Dot is a reference to Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan wrote the poem Pale Blue Dot, where he said, look at this dot, and you zoom out, and it's like sand. It's like you're looking at a bunch of little sparkles in space. And he said, every ruler, every hero, every villain, every politician, every genius, every whatever, everything you can imagine has happened in this little pale blue dot. Look at how insignificant we are, right? And inside a pale blue dot, it's like, you know, the lyrics are basically saying like, we fight over things that don't matter. We pray to things that don't talk back to us. We keep repeating the same mistakes out of hubris and stupidity. Like, why are we doing this to ourselves? Right? So it's written in a sort of classic rocky sort of riff, right? So if I were to pull the guitar off the wall, like it's kind of like right? So it's very, very classic rock. And when you do that, all of a sudden you have all those open chords. You have like the scales and the harmonic richness that you can bring to that, which is, you know, part of the genre. Like it's so natural, it's so obvious. So, you know, I wrote the main lead, and then I started to enrich it with harmony. So that's what this song's about. That's like why it sounds the way it does.
Excellent.
Yeah, we just visited New York City and went to see John Lennon's the area where he was killed, which was
Oh yeah, on the Upper West Side,
yeah,
left side of the
yeah, they have a
Central Park.
Central Park. They have a wonderful little spot, you know, that they've dedicated to him, and I know it's just like, here's a man that was writing amazing songs.
It was all about peace.
All about
Yeah,
all about
yeah,
peace.
it's
All
true.
about peace. Yeah.
But I know what you mean. I
It's
actually
just
had the
so
feeling not
sad.
too long ago. I thought, you know, if they say pray for peace, and I'm like, why? We've been doing that for thousands of years. Obviously, it doesn't work.
Well,
you know,
yeah, maybe I'm biased here, and I know that, you know, religion is a taboo subject, but like the praying part for peace seems counterintuitive, because a lot of the lack of peace is related to people's strongly held beliefs
right?
about God, right? Case in
Exactly.
point, the Middle East, you know, the last 100 years at least in Israel, Palestine, like disputed land, but
Right.
they very much are sort of at odds with religious reasons, right? So it's like, that story is as old as time itself.
It
in our
is.
planet, right? But my point is like, why haven't we learned anything?
Yeah.
Like, why are we so
Exactly.
short-sighted? Well, the irony though is that that song ends, and the immediate next song is this
I was
kind of
just gonna
Taylor
say
Swift-esque.
that.
I wrote it, sorry, because, you know, like I wrote that song during the summertime, and it was around the time that Taylor Swift had come to Seattle. And by the way, that was the same exact weekend that like Barbie and Oppenheimer happened. And yeah, you know, so like for the 6 month leading up to that, like everyone's like Taylor Swift, and it's a very distinct songwriting style, right? And if you listen to it, it's like kind of it's got hints of like Jack Antonoff, who's like a famous producer for like Lana Del Rey and those types of folks. And so I really wanted to do something that felt like very bare, very analog synth. Right. And then I had written Pale Blue Dot, which is very sort of sing-songy and very much of a journey, and it's very kind of like folky. And then I wanted to sort of just be on the nose on the next one. Let's stop fighting. Let's not fight anymore. Right.
Track
And that was
9,
the
yep.
song. Yeah. And
Stupid
so
Wars.
and so that was, yeah, it's called Stupid Wars.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
kind of like the bookend to that whole thing. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Super
it's kind of
cool.
funny. Like it's one of those things where like a theme, it wasn't always all about myself in the sense like, oh, it's self-reflection, but it was also sort of like growing up and kind of how you perceive yourself in the context of like everything that is happening around you all the time, which is this endless washing machine of stuff, you know.
So when I was growing up, of course, we had Todd Rundgren. Do you
Yeah.
know his stuff? Did you listen
Yeah,
to?
my mom's a big fan of Todd Rundgren.
Yeah, so was I. And in fact, in high school, when he was in Nas, that was the original band. Everybody thought it was the band I had with your dad. But it was he thought it was they thought it was us, but a little song called "Hello, It's Me." But then he went on and did a lot of synth work with Utopia. Is that something you would have listened to at all, or
What, like, did I listen to Todd Rundgren?
yeah, or were you forced to into it from your mom?
I mean, like I am the child of my parents.
Oh,
I'm a musician because they are musicians. I am musical because they inundated me with music when I was
right,
growing up.
right.
You know, my mom and dad split up when I was like 3 years old, but I lived
Oh,
with my mom. And my mom is a musician for a living. And when I'd go stay with my dad, he's a musician for a living. My uncle's a musician for a living. So like there's never been a moment in my whole life where I wasn't just like swimming in a sea of music.
sure.
The the synth stuff that I like, ironically, has nothing to do with the synth music of old. So
Mhm,
like when I was in college, I used to be a huge Stevie Wonder fan, and obviously they had like lots of Mogi stuff on there, like the, the Toto stuff. But like outside of that, I love things like Nine Inch Nails. I love things like Daft Punk, all of this sort of modern electronica. Like that stuff is really where a lot of my synthesizer music sort of taste came from, but a lot of um the edge came from my rock and roll background, or a
Mhm.
lot of the sort of music theory sort of side of my taste came from the fact that I've been listening to like everything that my parents play for a living. So like every time they'd have a gig,
mhm,
I'd hear 20 super famous standards 10 times in a row.
mhm,
And then that was my whole childhood, like just listening to these standards all the time of like jazz or rock or 80s or hop music or, and my mom and my uncle were in the Righteous Brothers for 20 years. So like on the road with them and parts of my childhood listening to that stuff. I mean, like all of it's crept in, you know. No, I mean that's the thing that I struggle with is like from a cohesion and consistency standpoint, they say that like the more similar each song is, the better it is for your audience. Because if you ever like marketed a song to somebody for like dance music, and then your next song is not dance music, well, then they're not getting what they came for, and then they kind of
Mm.
don't, or the retention drops off, right? But my problem is that I've been enriched by the music for so long that I don't have um I can't stop myself but just write every feeling or vibe that comes to me, which means that over my 4 albums and all of the collab songs that I've written and all of that stuff, and even the other projects I've done, I could be 10 different artists, really. Like
mhm,
if you think of it like in terms of like lanes and styles, right? So
mhm,
even on this album, the type of feedback I got from my artist friends, my local artist friends, was like, oh, this part of the album is like the type of stuff I like, and then this part of the album lost me because I don't really like this genre so much, and then this thing is like, and I'm like, yeah, okay, well, what that's really telling me is like sometimes some folks maybe don't they don't branch out enough, maybe. I don't know.
mhm. You're right.
It's not a problem, but like everyone enjoys what they
Mhm.
enjoy. It is what it is.
Yeah, it's excellent.
We wondered, just tell us a little bit about the music scene in Seattle, Washington, or where you are right now.
Well, yeah. So Seattle is kind of like, I feel like the Seattle of today is like always in the shadow of the Seattle of the 90s, in the sense that like everyone was like, oh, Pearl Jam and Nirvana are such big deals to like this giant wave of music that happened in that decade, where you have bands like, Alice in Chains, also a Seattle band. You've got, Mudhoney and, all the Soundgarden and Smashing Pumpkins and all these bands that were just super huge at that moment. And Seattle became like the sort of the hot place on the map, right?
Mhm,
And after that died off, became like this kind of relic of the past, right? And so sometimes you can get the sense that people overlook the thriving music scene of today because of that. On the other hand, is it really thriving? Well, I mean, like to a degree, no. Because if you think about places like LA, New York, Austin, Memphis, just Nashville, like all these places that are like music business places, um, a lot of like touring acts will actually choose to not tour through Seattle because like it can be a bit of a question mark if they're going to fill up the room or not. Why is that? Well, what is the makeup of the city? Well, we've got people who used to grow up in Seattle who were maybe, local working class folks, right? And those are P&W people through and through. Like they wear their puffy jacket and their plaid and their beanie and they do the coffee thing and the whole nine, right? And then you've got people who are sort of relocated to Seattle for tech jobs, right? So you've got Redfin, Zillow, HBO, Amazon, Meta. There used to be a Twitter office there. Oh, it's hi-fi. Yeah. And and
What's
just like a
happening there?
million. Oh yeah, and it's like new AI based like gestures. But my point is though is that like we're kind of going through this period where there's a bit of a social and economic divide between the original folks who lived here before and the people who came in for tech. And I happen to be in the second category in the sense that I came here from tech. Um, and so for that reason, it can be a little hot and cold. Like, what kind of crowd are we going to get tonight? And if you're trying to earn a living touring, that can be weird. So, my friends who are in the music scene, they do a really good job of like getting a thriving little heartbeat going. And we have a handful of artists out here that are sort of like in the up and coming, category. And then you've got some record labels that are from the earlier days who are still bringing about like new bands, and they're famous in their own way. Um, but yeah, so I would say like Seattle's music scene is very electronic. It's also very rocky. There's a lot of like garage rock bands that are like really good that have like elements of that stuff. There's also the kind of indie bedroom pop thing, the very polished and professional version, all the way to the sort of developing version of that. And then there's you know, the KEXP kind of circuit where like there's all the folks who are like, miniature famous people from the last 20 years, like Postal Service, like those types of bands, like Death Cab for Cutie. They're like really famous in Seattle. And those guys would sell out a show no problem around here. But so there's kind of like all these little chasms that have formed, like these little cliques, I guess.
Yep,
Sounds good.
that's cool. And then just what was the other one? Yeah.
What is it?
Oh, just what's in the future here? We have a question here. Working on any new projects?
Yeah, so in 2024, I want to do a couple things. Number one, I want to release an album under Wolf Pet. I've been really working on that for a long time. I've got about 20 partially written songs with that. So it kind of spans the styles of like um kind of like Brian Wilson meets folk music meets Tom Petty, right?
Oh,
So kind of that kind of stuff if you're into that. And then also I want to do a lot of collaborations in 2024. Like I feel like it takes me a lot of mental bandwidth to sort of make a thematic journey and tie it all together, get it polished to a level that I want to release it. So doing albums is something that I don't want to do every single year. It feels heavy to me in terms of like labor, especially given my day job. But the collaborations, I find them to be like really fun. It's like you're kind of spinning the wheel of fortune or whatever and seeing like what kind of like journey are we gonna land on today, right? In the sense that like right now I'm working with an Australian artist called Griff, and we're doing a new disco track. So it's like, I've got the Prophet 10 back here. It's really synthy, it's very funky. I'm playing like interesting bass parts. Those are fun to do, but I don't do that very often. Or I did the one with Starfarer that I mentioned where it was Jacob Collier-esque in the sense that you remember in that on Rise of the Midnight Sun, there's that song Glow, and it starts with
Mhm.
that interesting sort of prismatic harmony.
And that's exactly what I thought of was Jacob
Yeah.
Well,
Collier.
I also
Yeah.
thought of the pentatonics a little bit too.
Yeah, yeah. So I that prismatic thing is like
Mhm,
basically what I'm doing is like da, da, na, 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 and I
mhm.
recorded one, two, three, four, five, five separate entire takes, and I
Mhm.
just sustained each one of them, and then I sampled them and I played them like a keyboard, so I could like kind of riff off of them, and
Well, I just wanted to
well, I
say
did.
we thought it was a harmonizer, but because it was so tight, so good for you if you did that separate, man.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, that's the joy of computers is you can zoom as far as you can go and then just kind of line things up. But with the Starfarer collab, it was a disco track, and I did a chorus like that, like "You're the perfect girl," da, na, 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 right? It's a very similar sort of approach, and I did it in like the pocket, and it's real funky, and kind of outer spacey. So I just love doing collaborations with people because you get to sort of try your hand at something that you wouldn't normally fit into a record that's a kind of theme.
Well, doing these separate names here, Wolf Pet and Saint Moss, that's pretty
Mhm.
interesting. Are you going to try to make people know that, hey, this is user doing this, or you're just not like even doing any connection whatsoever out there?
Well, in some cases, like where it was written by for a different project, and then I ended up using it because it fit the theme because I am the human that felt those emotions. I will just tag both artists, but like there's going to be all sorts of things that are just completely on an island. Like when I release a bunch of Wolf Pet stuff, it's just going to be Wolf Pet, right? But an example of this is the song Games on Rise of the Midnight Sun. So you'll notice that Games feels like it's on an island. It's a different sounding song than a lot of the other songs, right? And um that song, it sounds like a Weezer song. Like it's like a chuggy garage bandy dun 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 dun. It's like very guitar-y, right?
Mhm.
And not super synthy. But I brought in my friend Colin from Atomic Pines, a local artist, Atomic Pines, right? So that's like very spacey meets mossy woods, right? So this is
Mhm.
kind of the vibe of being an electronic artist in the Pacific Northwest. So, I had written that as Wolf Pet. It had Atomic Pines doing synthesizer stuff on it, and then I played and sang on it, and we did harmonies together and had a big heavy slapback echo on it, and it
Oh,
sounds like a rock and roll song. And so in that case, I tagged all three of us, like that all three of us wrote that basically. And Games is a very interesting song because like, how I had said earlier, like a lot of the lyrics are sort of me sort of looking in the mirror and talking to myself. Well, Games was written almost as in the tone of like a eulogy, I guess you could say.
mm,
I laughed at all the wrong times. I spoke when I should have been quiet. I lied when I should have told the truth, right? All of
mm,
these things, I learned my lessons with my hand in a fire. Like all these things are supposed to be sort of references to like, hey,
mm.
like I may have done the wrong things in the moment. I thought I was doing the right thing in the moment. And now that I'm growing up, I realize that mistakes were made. But like at the end of the day, like I am who I am because of those mistakes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I played all these games with my life, and I'm lucky that I survived it. But it's written like in the sense it's like a eulogy because like after we're gone, there's no use in lying about it anymore. It's like
Yeah.
it's over. You know what I mean? And so like
Sure.
Games was very much written like that.
Yeah.
So
Again, I want to encourage our audience really listen to the lyrics. And
yeah.
that particular song, right away that caught me, you said there's a different person that did the synth work on that.
Yeah.
It was the same sound as a lot of what Toto used. That's
Yeah,
what
so
it
that
hit me a little bit
synthesizer,
there. Yeah.
yeah, that synthesizer was a combination of like a virtual synth that I had on my computer and then also layered with a Juno 106. So like I have come to the point in my journey as a writer that like I no longer want to write for the sake of putting my gear on stage. It's not just about the gear. I want it to be sonically interesting. And so like if I had been purely Juno 106, it would have sounded very distinct and very like, oh, I know what that synthesizer is. But it sounds vague in its origin because
Mhm.
it's two things layered on top of each other, and one of them is a virtual instrument. And then I'm singing with a heavy slapback with a guitar behind me, right? So it's like the whole point is that, you know, it's not a love letter to my gear.
Mhm.
It's a song and it serves the song. So like that's the kind of thing that I had to sort of communicate when I was collaborating with Atomic on that, is like, hey, like here's what I want this to feel like. I want this to be like you're staring deep into my heart when you're hearing this, and
Mhm.
there's nothing distracting you. Like I am not lying to myself and I'm not lying to you. Like get all of the crap out of the way. And like that was the purpose of the song, is to like, hey, like I finally kind of taken the wall down. And so like sonically it had to feel that way.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And
Do you have any
mhm.
live shows coming up?
So I'm trying to book a tour right now. So
Mhm.
like I'm kind of focusing my energy on that, because the scarcity of shows is a good thing, right? So like if you oversaturate yourself in the local market, people feel like they don't necessarily need to show up to this show. So I'm totally okay with playing fewer shows and like kind of making a moment of it. Um, and so right now I'm kind of focusing my energy on like, hey, let's get a little tour going.
What do you have to take a bunch of keyboards then? Are you when you
So
go
it's a
to play?
combination of things. So like because like we have, you know, click tracks and lighting and all this
Mhm.
stuff that kind of is computer powered, like you can also have MIDI playing in the background, and the MIDI you can use and kind of weave it through different software to produce different sounds. And I have samplers and I have keyboards and
Mhm.
guitars. And so the way that we play live is me and my bandmate Travis, we do um, two synthesizers and two guitars and vocals. And so and then we basically use some of the background programming, and it's flowing through the equipment that we're using. So that way, like the equipment may change its patch like partway through something. And so like I'm playing something and then it's something different.
Mm.
So because a lot of this stuff was written on my computer, like I can do that, right? So like it's not that hard to like recall some of these sounds. But the thing that's really fun is that kind of leaning into the guitar playing thing, I really like wanted to do less of what I just said. So like I want to bring a physical hardware synthesizer with me,
Mhm.
and I want to play it like a guitar, and I want to have less of a safety net, because that's like the way that I grew up and that's like the type of music that my family plays for a living, right? And so case in point, when we were playing that show at the Central Saloon with Empathy Test, we were like going on, and we had just sound checked and did a bunch of stuff and line checks, and we have both of our synthesizers into the house, and they cut the lights, they cut the music, and then they were like, go. And so we're doing Hello World as the intro to our show, that kind of big, beautiful synthy thing. And I realized that my keyboard signal is not making it to the house anymore. Something happened. He did something and the signal got messed up
Ah,
at the front of house, right? And so I kind of leaned to the mic and I said, I'm not getting any synth. And he's like, oh no. And I can see him kind of like scrambling, but time is passing. We've got the lighting cues going. And I'm like, fine. So I just picked up my guitar and played it on the guitar,
mhm.
start to finish. We played the whole song on the fly with different instruments. And that was
Mhm.
the whole thing, was it's like, okay, like this is how it's going to be. That's fine. And that's why it's so fun, is because like we're both musicians. We've been musicians for many years. Like this isn't really that big a deal. But if you kind of think about it from the kind of moment to moment perspective, like sometimes if all of it is programmed, then all of a sudden you're kind of at the mercy of that. And another thing happened in that show, incidentally. Partway through us playing the song Nightmare, actually no, we were playing the song Electricity from the album Influence, and there's this big screeching guitar solo at the end of it, and I broke a string. And then all of a sudden Nightmare happens, the song Nightmare. And Nightmare has a big kind of Lenny Kravitz-esque solo with a big octave pedal on it. And I was like, oh crap, my guitar has broken the string that I'm supposed to be playing the solo around. And the irony is that when I was in college, I broke a string on my acoustic guitar, and just out of sheer laziness, I left it like that for like 3 years. And so I was able to sort of improvise a new solo around the broken string, and it was fine.
That's
And my wife doesn't compliment me about this very often, but she goes, I knew what happened. I wasn't sure if anyone else saw it, but I was really panicking when I knew what was about to happen. And you just did it. And I was so impressed. Oh my God, babe, good job. And I was just like, see, this is why you need to not fix your broken strings for 3 years.
That's great.
Now,
I love
do you
it.
feel like your audience enjoys that better when you're on your
Yeah.
not broken strings, but when you're actually getting into it and playing
Well,
it?
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, because like, when everything is like perfect, then
Mhm.
what? Okay,
Right.
like but like when you recall the moment, you're like, there's drama and you're not sure what's gonna happen. You're not sure if you're gonna see a car wreck or not.
Right. Hey, that's the
And
fun of it.
that's actually kind of part of the fun, right?
Right.
It's like, will he or won't he, like, make a mess of this? So luckily for us, we have the chops to be able to like deal with that situation. But
Yeah.
like it could have been worse.
Yeah.
It
No,
could have been a lot worse.
So you mentioned your bandmate Travis. Can you just tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, so Travis is he's such an interesting guy. So like first of all, he's got like crazy amounts of energy on stage. So he's the guy, I'm standing there playing and singing and da da da, and he's jumping in the air constantly. Like so like you'll see these pictures of him where he's like literally levitating, and he's got a mohawk, and like so he's kind of a silver fox, he's like my age, and his hair is like turned like very like white, but he's got a mohawk and stubble and piercings, and he just looks rock and roll. He's very cool, and he's very good looking, right? And so like the thing is I feel it's kind of funny to have him on stage, because like he takes a lot of the pressure off me, because he's just so cool to look at. So like his whole thing that he does on stage. And it just so happens that he is in a punk band, like a pop punk band called The Evenings. And when I was just getting to know him, I was like, "Hey, I want to get more into guitar playing again. Can I like help you out in a live show for the evenings?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." So I started playing guitar as a secondary guitarist for his band The Evenings. And then we were like, "Hey, do you want to do the same thing for User? Do you want to be like keys and guitar?" And so then we basically just joined each other's bands. And it's been like that for 2.5 years now. And then we kind of started doing Wolf Pet stuff, and we started doing other things. So like we've got all these projects where it's kind of funny. We'll be like looking for a drummer or something, be like, "Hey, looking for a drummer who wants to join 4 bands at the same time." Like, that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, I have a lot of admiration for him. He's really fun. He's really cool. His guitar playing is like the epitome of like punk rock. Like he brings it. And that is, truthfully, when I talk about wanting to do more for the audience and play more guitar and stuff, like truthfully, like he's actually part of how that whole thing snowballed, because it just worked so well, you know. And I've been playing guitar my entire life, so like I'm perfectly comfortable doing that. But the shift in energy that happened as a result of doing that was like irrefutable. I was like, I don't want to not do this anymore. So that's Travis.
No, that's
Sounds like
beautiful.
a great collaboration.
We got you.
You basically did a lot of background for, oh boy, at least
Songs.
4 or 5 songs,
So
and
good.
Yeah.
so you don't have to choose a song, and you did it, you know? You already did that.
The last thing I'll tell you is that
Okay.
if you found the opening track reminiscent, that's because it has, like I said earlier, the album is like kind of a nod to growing up in Palm Springs and classic rock, right? And I had put out 3 albums of synthesizer music before releasing Rise of the Midnight Sun.
Mm.
So I wanted to sort of do a little setting up expectations and then diverting those expectations. So the opening minute of the first song, Hello World, it's Hello World because number one, that's like a reference to like computing, and I'm a computer guy for a living. That's my job. The second thing is that I needed to reintroduce myself with this sound. The first minute is all synthesizer stuff, and you find that it starts to warp and change in its tempo, and it starts to go in another way, and it feels disorienting. And then all of a sudden, and it's guitar song. And the whole vibe of that, I wanted to capture the introduction to AC/DC's For Those About to Rock. So,
Hmm.
and there's even tempo change in that, right? So like
Right.
it's like kind of a nod to what I had been doing versus where I'm going, and
Cool. Yeah.
kind of setting the tone. And then the sort of lyrical theme, when I was young, I was so free. I knew nothing I couldn't see. I had no fear of my mortality, right? It's like this is an album about self-discovery and growth and like, coming to terms with yourself, but it's also sonically I'm heading on a different lane now. So
Yeah.
it's like it says a lot of things without saying a lot of things.
Mhm. Christian, thanks so much for being with us on tonight's show. It's been wonderful. The music's wonderful. The recordings are beautiful. We've had a great time.
I really appreciate you guys taking the time to chat with me, and I love talking about the creative process, and I know you guys do as well. You got all that gear behind you. I wish I
Oh,
was
yeah.
sitting there playing those drums, to be
Oh,
honest
you
with you.
see the
Yeah.
drums in the background.
I
Yeah.
don't play them. I just have them.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, this is just for show.
Yeah. Well, when I have it, no, seriously, when I have a drummer, it's like, so they don't, because we're upstairs and I didn't
I
want to
got
carry
you.
things, but
Oh, I know the drill. I know the drill.
I'm more like the monkey that you wind up with if I play drums, hitting each drum each on the same beat.
Hey, we're all just some kind of wind up toy. Right?
There you go.
Yeah. Keep on rocking, Christian. It sounds
Yeah, thank you
great.
so much.
Mm.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.